These are the instruments and materials that you will use to complete Project 1. The anatomical teeth or teeth models, a second molar to molar upper and lower set of straight wire Elite OptiMem mini twin brackets, a tube of super glue gel, a mechanical pencil, boom gauge, explorer, bracket placement pliers. There are two types of pliers. One is smaller with curved beaks. The other is a standard cotton plier in the narrow tip Mathel needle holder. The mini twin series bracket you'll be using for the bracket projects will be identified with a painted dot on the distal gingival tie wing of the upper and lower. A vertical scribe line bisects the center of each bracket. The vertical long axis of each straight wire bracket is designed and constructed to be located on the vertical long axis of the tooth's crown. Therefore, you must begin by locating the long axis and finding the center of the tooth. On your project today, we're going to be using anatomical teeth, referred to as teeth models, on your supply list. Our objective is to find the center of the clinical crown of the tooth. Looking at these teeth, you will see the entire anatomical crown and all the root structure, which makes determining the actual length of the clinical crown difficult. Because we're only concerned with the clinical crown, I'm going to give you the step or vertical height measurement that we want to use to place the brackets. Rather than each person using clinical judgment to measure the teeth, the vertical height measurements are listed on your project page. The first thing we will do is mark the long axis of each tooth, and more importantly, the physical center of each tooth. Divide the crown in half, mesial distal. You want to see as much tooth structure from the distal of that line as you do from the mesial of that line. To begin, mark all your long axis lines, upper and lower, second premolar to second premolar. Start with the anterior teeth, and I like to start my centrals and move posterior to do the whole quadrant. I would mark all the vertical lines first, the center of the teeth, and then go back and mark our heights. On the premolars, I'm often asked, do you want to begin your vertical line at the cusp tip? As long as the cusp tip is the center of the tooth, yes. Mark the center of the tooth rather than the height of contour or the most prominent portion of the facial cusp if they are not one and the same. On the upper molars, mark a vertical line down the central groove. Due to the anatomy of the upper molars, the line drawn down the central groove is not 90 degrees or perpendicular to the occlusal plane. It's slanted ever so slightly to the distal. Next, mark a line down the center of the mesial buccal cusp that is parallel to the central groove. So we've marked the central groove and then a parallel line that divides the mesial buccal cusp tip in half. Repeat this for the second molar as well. Continue placing all vertical lines, making the long axis or center of the lower anterior teeth. On the premolars, it's more challenging to locate the center because of the bulb shape of the teeth. Just keep in mind that the brackets need to sit in the physical center of the tooth to avoid rotations. On the lower molars, we follow the same guidelines as the upper. On the lower, however, the central groove is more straight up and down and not as slanted. Draw a line down the central groove and then draw a parallel line down the center of the mesial buccal cusp. With all vertical lines complete, let's start drawing our step or horizontal lines. This is the Boone bracket position gauge from your instrument list. This gauge is placed on the incisal or occlusal surface of the tooth to simplify bracket positioning. The measurements available are 3.5, 4, 4.5, and 5. I'd personally like to see them make another one with increments from 2.5 to 7 millimeters. Do not cant the Boone gauge up or down, just in a straight line. Notice the position of the sharp point on the tooth. Canting it up makes the mark too gingival. Canting it down makes the mark too incisal. Beginning with the maxillary anterior teeth, mark the horizontal lines for the bracket height placement using the measurements given for this project. We will mark the height and put all 4 incisors on at 4 millimeters for this exercise. The cuspid bracket will be placed at 5 millimeters. Draw your line completely across, giving you a better reference. The first premolars will be at 4.5 millimeters, and we go from the buccal tip to the LA point, which is 4.5 millimeters. The second premolar will be at 4 millimeters. The first molar will be at 3.5 millimeters from the mesial buccal cusp tip to the buccal surface. On the second molar, we need to mark 3 millimeters. The Boone gauge does not have a 3 millimeter measurement, so we want to mark 3.5 and then draw the line 1/2 millimeter more occlusal. Now evaluate your lines and note that as you come forward in the mouth, you'll always see more tooth structure from the line to the cusp tip. Each tooth becomes progressively longer. The Boone gauge will be used to confirm the step or vertical height placement of the bracket after placement. We draw the horizontal lines as a reference line, marking the measurements, and we come back with the gauge to actually measure to the center of the bracket and confirm that height, while we are actually placing the bracket. I suggest using the safety tray individual bracket carrier to organize and align the brackets for placement. Adhesive pads will keep the brackets stationary.